Om Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvichavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So the topic for this evening is the obstacle of the ego, and we had a course on it today and yesterday, but so as not to disrupt the whole overall program, where normally on a Sunday evening Swami Vimokshananda would give a series of talks on Gospel of Ramakrishna. I didn't want to disrupt that series, but at the same time I didn't want to disrupt the overall program. So it's very easy for me to talk on this subject since I've been talking on it for the last few days. This is really just an extension on a course that we do, primarily to do with the ego as an obstacle. So we have to examine what we mean by obstacle and what we mean by ego. Now, during the introduction that I give out, I give a small history of what we can consider to be the ego. It's called ego formation. If the ego were to speak, it might tell us the following story. In the beginning, I was pure consciousness. I was like a vast, limitless, formless and blissful ocean. A small section of a wave rose, curled, and modified into a temporary camp, suitable for certain functions. A label of I was applied and an understanding, I am the camp manager. This seemed to separate me from the ocean, and I started to say that no one could prevail against me or prevent me from doing anything. And from this developed pride, self-interest, whereby my own well-being became paramount. I lost respect for others, became angry with them and started quarreling with them. And I'll make an extension, started extending that to my nation and making war. In wanting to survive, I also decided that I should be seen in the best light by those who were favorably disposed to me, and those who weren't favorably disposed to me, then I didn't have to appear in any other format. I was careless about my appearance. So it's a very curious thing, and it is classified in Patanjali Yoga Sutras as a klesha. There are a number of kleshas, obstacles. But you see, if we are faced with obstacles and they become threatening to us, we have one or two attitudes. A negative attitude, which will say, this is an insurmountable obstacle, and we start complaining. And I suppose there's an Irish saying, it's better to light a candle than curse the dark. I have to do something positive about it. And in that way I have to take a different view of life to say, supposing an obstacle is just an obstacle like a hurdle that you put in an Olympic game. That means, supposing I get selected, well, a bit unlikely, but get selected for Olympic hurdling, and supposing I say, I think I can do this. Only one thing you do. What is that? If you can please remove all the hurdles. That wouldn't be much of a sport. Instead of doing that, I learn the technique of estimating where the hurdles are, and as I come across them, extending my leg in such a way that I clear the obstacle, tuck my other foot in so the ankle doesn't tip it, and learn the art that if I jump too soon, then my front foot will hit it. If I do too late, the back foot will get it. In this way, we have to learn with a sporting attitude that we have the capacity and the equipment to move around any obstacle we like. It need not be a struggle. It need not be a plot against us or be seen to be that. It can be seen as something delightful. And if we add a sense of God with it, we can say a delightful sport with the Lord of the universe. Because he, knowing, of course, that any obstacle that is provided is also provided the capacity to get over it and the solution around it. You can put it in different contexts. If I have a thorn-filled road, put on tough shoes. If I have potholes in the road, get a suitable four-wheel drive. I have the equipment already. That must be asserted by anybody, so that anything can be viewed in a more positive light, knowing that I create another obstacle if I view it in any other way. If I think it is an obstacle, insurmountable, if I think it's a struggle, a difficulty, some kind of plot against me, if I put myself in a victim mode, then I'm adding to the complication. Knowing that whatever thought I produce becomes a condensed version in universe around me. That also has to be added. So this that was just read out, in the beginning, what is the beginning? We don't know what is the beginning. But for our purposes, in the beginning of our own life. So what was I? I was, and always was, pure consciousness. But what is pure consciousness? So today, consciousness is a very important subject. There is a certain neuroscientist famous for his statement. His name is Chalmers, Australian man. And his statement is, consciousness is the hard problem. Why is it the hard problem? Because if I think there is nothing else in this world except what I see, what I know, in terms of material substance, things which are contained in the natural world and nothing beyond, then it's a very hard problem. Because where is consciousness located? I have to locate it somewhere in the brain. And then I have an added complicated question. How does self-awareness, consciousness, and a well-formed and informed reaction take place? Unless it comes from somewhere outside or somewhere subtly inside, if you like, nature, which really after all is only inert, insentient stuff. How do I get a rock and make it into a man with full consciousness? Is a big problem. And so there is a kind of ocean, you can imagine it, an ocean which is always already there, described as existence and consciousness and bliss, because we know we can't get non-existence, or we can't get existence from non-existence. That doesn't make any sense. And we can't get consciousness from unconsciousness. And we can't get the sensation of bliss if there are more than one. If two people live together, they will quarrel, sometimes. But if there's nobody else, there's no quarrel. If there's a deep sleep where there's no other object, I say a peaceful sleep. Why? Nobody else to argue with, nobody else to be jealous of, nobody else to be a proud exhibitionist of. No second, one without a second. That makes things blissful. And so this consciousness must be, as I say, vast, limitless, formless ocean. Then you see what happens in an ocean. There are various levels within an ocean. At its very depth, there's no differentiation. It all seems to be oneness. As I get nearer and nearer the surface, the ripples and currents start being felt. And finally, when I get to the surface, it's all waves and eddies and currents and all disturbance. And these can be very high or very low. And if you go in a ship, in a storm, the waves will be much higher than the ship and threaten to overturn the ship. If it wasn't for the ship's buoyancy and flexibility in going with the wave as opposed to resisting the wave, it would be suddenly overturned. And so, one of these waves in this analogy I take it as a personalized camp. And we know that it happens when I'm a baby onwards, because a certain individuality comes in. A baby starts defining what a face looks like, a different face looks like, different characteristics. An individuality sets in, and I identify with this wave, not with the ocean. Increasingly with the wave and not the ocean. And yet my nature is pure consciousness. So therein lies the difficulty. Now there's no standard version of this, because we have this understanding in psychology that every action and thought creates its corresponding carbon copy, and that goes into a deposit account called memory. It's all in the unconscious mind. And every impulse that I have comes from that area. It doesn't come from the conscious area. The conscious area just receives something. It goes into the unconscious area, comes back into the conscious area, where I can make certain conscious decisions. Even then the unconscious might take over. And this is broadly speaking what we call habit. Habit is just a repetition, a rehearsal of the same things over and over again, to the extent that it may be very difficult to change. Very difficult to change a habit, and if I want to grow, advance, and develop, then I have to change the habit. By attacking it, by addressing it directly, no, that doesn't work. I have to create a counter habit, something new, something more positive, a different way of thinking. And so the whole idea of overcoming the obstacle of the ego is not to attack it directly, but treat it like making friends with an animal. It would be very dangerous to try and make friends with a dog by staring it directly in the eyes. Even if you assert inwardly, you're my friend, the dog might not agree. If you extend your hand, the danger it might bite. Look in this direction, put your hand, let it sniff a little bit, and then a little bit of stroking behind the ear, and so on. And then you're friends. It trusts you now. Same thing with the institution as well, treat it in this way. But with people we have to do it like that, and with all the various obstacles that we have to treat it like that, in an indirect and subtle way. Repression will not work. If you want to control the mind, don't whip it. There's the expression, the mind is like the monkey mind. Well, if there's a monkey mind, which is always in constant disturbance, and added to it, its disturbance will be such things as pride and jealousy, envy and desire, and all these things added, which may increase the agitation. What should we do? Should we cease all that in the face of the unconscious tendency toward it? No. Cautiously and carefully, and with a sense of delight, a sense of sportfulness, we then address it. We address it by consciously looking at things in a different way. It's very seldom that we're able to look at this personality in its true light. And what we call ego is nothing more than this persona. And persona means a mask. Personality, persona, mask. You know yourself that if you take a mask made from any substance, wood or what have you, and put it on your face, I am not the mask. That's very clear. In the ancient days of Greece, where you had to portray emotions to an audience that was maybe at a distance in a big amphitheater, maybe with lights of beacons of fire lighting up a stage, the audience can hardly see you or see your emotions on your face unless you put a mask on portraying happiness, sadness, and so on. And in some dramas throughout the world, we find these various expressions. Even in Javanese culture, they won't have direct actors. Puppets will portray these things, very cleverly done. And in certain South Indian dance and so on, the mask is put on portraying anger or happiness or joy or love or any of these emotions. These are all contained in your mask. This mask is carefully cultivated. Now it's cultivated with a base. We call this base guna. That is a tendency from previously, because every thought, every action, every impression carries through the unconscious, and the unconscious didn't develop when you were born, according to this Vedanta system that embraces also Sankhya and Yoga and so on. According to that system, life is a journey with a purpose. And that purpose is just thwarted, as it were, by various obstacles put in your way. And the game of life is to see how well you can get around it. So it requires a sporting attitude. It requires the confidence that I have the capacity and ability to do it. And it requires, of course, obstacles. Obstacles themselves have to be there. Yeah.
Swamiji, I had one small doubt that talking about ego and self-confidence, what is the difference between an ego and a self-confidence?
Okay. See, ego from a psychological point of view is just a component, like a component in your engine. It's required. If it wasn't there, man wouldn't have got the confidence and self-confidence to go and ride on a horse or an elephant. An elephant can trample him in one movement. But man's ego is able to overcome that and control that, master such a huge beast. It means that, that man has become the master race of all biological species, probably to its own detriment. It's damaging the environment here and there. It's the only species that managed to put its own death mark, if not careful, on its own environment and change climate and so on. Anyway, that aside, we're not talking of ego in this case, we're talking of egoism. There's a formation of an ego. What is that? It's defined in this way. This is Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And here, and I'll just read it out in the English translation, it says, the key obstacle, you see, the mother of all obstacles will be ignorance. Our goal is therefore knowledge. Knowledge is the antidote to ignorance. But what is ignorance? Ignorance is taking the non-eternal. This world is not eternal. The impure. This world is a mixture of things. The painful. No doubt this world is painful, with a few roses here and there. And the non-self. Self meaning the non-Atman. Atman and Purusha, these are interchangeable terms. And Purusha is used meaning Puri, derived from Puri, a city, and Purna, fullness. Lest you think that this is something encapsulated inside and can't escape. It pervades everywhere. And so this term Purusha is there. In any case, it means a fundamental self that is not this ego. What is this ego, therefore? It's the identification of this self, which is a seer, a witness, an observer, with the thing which is seen. What is seen? The body is observed. The mind is observed. The intellect is observed. And also all the objects are observed. This is presented in a series of various fields. And so what is ignorance is defined like this. It's taking the non-eternal, the impure, the painful, and the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the Atman, or self, respectively. We think that this machine called body-mind complex is a doer and is something that is to be rewarded by our own actions. The prophet-doer complex has to be transcended. That's what we mean by addressing the obstacle of the ego. How do we get around it? The short answer, of course, is we get around it by knowledge, cultivating knowledge, rehearsing the understanding that I am the immortal self. Now, the Bhagavad Gita does this because Sri Krishna is there to address an issue from Arjuna, who is somebody like all of us in pain, a difficult, painful situation. And the difficult, painful situation manifests itself in a nervous breakdown. All the symptoms of a nervous breakdown are there. Shaking, cannot hold the bow, all of this is there. And Sri Krishna is a great psychologist. I mentioned so many times before, but I'll mention it again. Repetition is not an issue for me. So I ask a group of people, who is the greatest psychologist in history? And they say Freud, Jung, all these things. And then one person may have said Buddha or something. No. Older than that, Krishna. But he didn't say, please lie on my couch and tell me what a fool you are. None of that took place. What he does is, he immediately asserts, this is your true nature. And you're grieving for those people you should not be grieved for. Why? Because all these things are just individual fragments of something which is eternal, nitya, eternal. And when we mix the whole thing up, what is impurity? Impurity is things are mixed up. And we mistake the non-eternal for the eternal. We think we'll live forever. Fool are we. It doesn't occur to us that we will die. And we may do whatever we like to the planet, but in probably 50, 60, 70 years, none of us will be around to see it. Life is very short, but we think it's enduring. We think that this present moment is a continuum, and it's not. A film is not a continuum. A film is small sections of photographs put together and run at a certain speed, and it looks as if it's moving. And even children can do it. On a pad, they can put a stick figure standing still. Then next picture, one leg is raised, one arm goes like this. So like in the series. And then you flick it in a fast motion. It looks like a man is running. Our life is like that. A television picture looks like one thing, but it's made from tiny pixels. This looks like a continuum, but it's made from small units of seconds. This whole thing, it's as if you're looking at a sky with a city in the foreground, and your conclusion is, the sky is carved into points and shapes and domes. It's not. So we make a superimposition of things which are not there, and our gut is telling us it is real. So all of this is anti-instinctual. That's our problem. That's our most difficult thing. It's going against what we are assuming naturally, because we are deluded. Is it wrong that we are deluded? No, no morality in it. It is as it is, and without delusion, nothing will run. It has to be deluded. If we overcame delusion, the human race would stop. Eating and drinking would stop. We would no longer perpetuate life. So it's necessary to keep this game going if we view it as a kind of game. But it requires a revaluation of what we see to see it in this light. So we take what is the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the Atman or self respectively. We take what it's not to be so, so that in this film of life, when a tragedy is played out, we weep. When a comedy is played out, we smile. We have no idea, it doesn't occur to us, that all these scenes are played out in a background of cardboard with a director and lights and a microphone. And actors who've well rehearsed their lines. And so Shakespeare says, all the world is a stage, we are but players. How true. So how can we orientate or reorientate ourselves so that it seeps down into the unconscious area and becomes our habitual state of mind? That's the challenge. So a definition is here of egoism. But I'll read the commentary that Swami Vivekananda gives. He says, all the different sorts of impressions have one source, ignorance. Ignorance mistaking one thing for another. We have first to learn what ignorance is. All of us think, I am the body and not this self. We're going to substitute the word self, the divine self, as Atman, with religious terms. God, what religion calls God, is what we call philosophically the self. So, and not the self, the pure, the effulgent. It doesn't require something else to make it light. It is itself self-lighted. It is self-effulgent. The ever blissful. And that is ignorance. We think of man and see man as body. This is the great delusion, he says. What a wonderful short commentary, so profound. It just tells us everything. And then we go on about egoism. So the English translation would say, egoism is the identification of the seer with the instrument of seeing. This mind and body is an instrument. Now, according to the Samkhyas, this instrument, which we call Andhakarana, a kind of internal instrument which is there, just as an engine is an internal instrument in a car. And just as an engine has different components, the mind itself has different components. Let's put it in a funny way. Let's suppose that this mind was something like an office. Now, in the office you have a reception area. Somebody comes in, let's say DHL or something, I'm not advertising, but whoever it is, whoever the messenger is, comes in with a package, delivers it at the reception area. The receptionist takes it in, and then sees, oh I see, it's for the 4th floor. You go up to the 4th floor where the executive offices are. It presents it to a coordinating manager, office manager, who then distributes it and owns it and takes it to an officer, executive officer, who has the capacity to decide what it is, what reaction should be there, is there a message that has to go back to the messenger, what will I do with it, and makes an executive decision about it. This is called buddhi, intellect. And so this internal instrument, which has a stuff to it, it's just made of stuff. What is the stuff of an engine? Let's say aluminium. It's more than that, but let's say aluminium. What is the mind made of? It's called chitta. Chitta, a mind stuff, a material stuff, just as anything in the universe is made from matter, but of a very subtle variety. There's no difference between mind and matter in the system. Matter is gross version of it, and mind is a subtle version of it, that's all. And since it's subtle, it's more causal. The mind has its effect on the matter. Now this chitta operates in a series of waves. 5 waves are identified. What is real knowledge, wrong knowledge, so right knowledge, wrong knowledge, memory, sleep, and verbal delusion. These are 5 kinds of waves which are there. You really want to explain that unless you really want to go into that. Suffice to say at the moment, 5 varieties of waves are there. So this is chitta, mind stuff, with certain functional sections. These functional sections are called manasa. Manasa, unfortunately translated as mind, creating a confusion that the overall thing is this. No. It's just the reception office where reactions and emotions are there and so on and so forth. And then of course there is and also the unconscious reactions are also there. And then there's an ego that is a kind of coordinating manager that takes ownership of it. That variety of consciousness that says, this is my area. And then of course there is the intellect. The composition of all these things make collectively what we call mind. So it's a material thing. When we identify ourselves with this instrument, and in addition the physical instrument, it's equivalent to identifying myself to the engine and body of the car. And I never make that mistake. I may name my car, probably a feminine term. You know, I don't know why they use a feminine term. How is your car? She's running well. So I don't know why this. Anyhow, never mind. So we put a personality to the car. We can make a little fun of it, but look at what we're doing. We're actually putting a personality onto the car, as if it were a person. And I think there's a cartoon like that, isn't it? Where there are cars that talk to each other and have emotions and feelings and all that. I think it might be called Cars or something.
Yeah.
You see? So it's us. We're doing this. We're doing this with this car here. Should we not re-register it as the earth car, God's earth car for His manifested glory? Should we not register the mind as the Lord's sitting room? Why should we make all this error? Well, we have to rehearse. We have to revalue things and make sure that we understand things in full perspective. If we make the error, this is the problem. We have no chance in controlling the mind, or no chance in controlling the body. If I think I'm the body, I cannot control it. If this is my nature, so be it. This is one of the difficulties with material atheism. That if I say, I am this organic complex and nothing more, then who is there? Is there any free will? That's why in theological arguments there's this debate about free will. Is there free will? Is there not? You see, if you say there's no free will, it lets you off the hook. But if it lets you off the hook, you can go and murder somebody, and you say, well, no free will. It's all predetermined. So, you see. But the judge, using his free will unfortunately put you in prison. So that's the difficulty. So egoism is the identification of the seer with the instrument of seeing. And we have to take this only as an instrument. Now if it's an instrument, we surely have to look after it. And so when we decide that we'll make the body healthy, it's only because Lord, this is your instrument, this is your temple, this is your housing, this is a city. Katha Upanishad registers it as 11-gated city, belonging to one who is unborn, ajna, and also whose consciousness, that is ajna, whose consciousness is unflickering, avakra, whose consciousness is unflickering. If we register that, then we'll have a completely different idea about their health. We won't overfeed it. We'll exercise it. Just like if you have a car, you'll give it a service now and then. You'll make sure it runs. You go to the car mechanic, what a pity my car is not running well. You say, well, when last did you give it a long journey? Exercise, in other words. No, I keep it in my garage and sit and feed it pasta all day. Well, then naturally it won't run. See? So how do you, if you want to take up a technique of bhakti, that is love of God, if you want to be a bhakta, surely you should say, Lord, let me worship you by making this body the best, making this mind the best, making this mind so that it reflects your glory, honoring it in meditation as your sitting room, honoring the body as your earth car. Why not? But carelessly, we treat this body carelessly, assuming it's me, and going even further, saying I have every right to do what I like with it because it's mine, belongs to me. No, it doesn't. The Bhagavad Gita only gives you one freedom. We hear today about all kinds of rights, human rights, animal rights, gender rights, etc. But the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna only gives us one right, the right to work. Not even the right to the fruits, it doesn't belong to us. Nothing. So the commentary is like this. The seer is really the self. The one that witnesses all these changes is the self. The pure one, the ever holy, the infinite, the immortal. This is the self of man. And what are the instruments? The chitta, or mind stuff that I spoke about. The buddhi, determinative faculty. The manas, or mind. And the indriyas, or sense organs, we didn't mention those. Because the sense organs are not the eyes and ears. These are the external organs, no doubt. But they're internal organs that replay in a dream and imagination. And there has to be attention fixed to these external organs to register something is happening. So it's an internal thing. So even the sense organs are internal, and these are the deities. These are the devas. Who is the chief of the devas? Indra. What are the senses? Indriyas. Okay. So, these are the instruments for him to see the external world. And the identification of the self with the instruments is what is called the ignorance of egoism. What is this body for and its gateways? It's so that we can see the external world. Here, my child, I'm giving you some windows so that you can see the outside, instead of it all blocked off. And we take it as we identify with it. It's like looking at through a telescope at the stars and saying, I am the telescope. And then the psychologist said, no. You can take that telescope and look at the telescope. You can look at the mind. Oh, thank you. And then the spiritual teacher says one thing further. You have the freedom to look away from it also. We say, I am the mind, I am thought, I am angry, or I am happy. How can we be angry? And how can we hate? We should identify ourselves with the self that cannot change. If it is unchangeable, how can it be one moment happy, one moment unhappy? It is formless, infinite, omnipresent. What can change it? It is beyond all law. What can affect it? Nothing in the universe can produce an effect on it. Yet through ignorance, we identify ourselves with the mind stuff. and think we feel pleasure or we feel pain. How can I get out of pain? It's not a relevant question. You're not in it. Who said you were in it? My gut says it. Oh, don't trust it. And then it goes on to other kleshas, attachment and so on and so forth, which come from this egoism. So how to overcome this ego, and then we finish off there. There's a wonderful passage in the Bhagavad Gita which addresses this. So this is the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And we're looking at the 27th stanza. It goes like this. And 27th to the 32nd stanza deals with this issue of how to root out this sense of egoism. Not ego, ego is useful. Egoism. So it says, Prakrite kriya manani. It begins like that. Gunae karmani sarvasana. The disposition of nature. This requires some explanation. The gunas of nature perform all action with the understanding clouded by egoism. Man thinks I am the doer. I am not the doer, in other words. What we call nature is the doer. And what is nature? It's God's glory. God's glory, God operating through all the time and space and components of nature. God himself is the doer. What is our opinion? I am the doer. That's the difficulty. Sri Krishna goes on, but almighty arm, the one with true insight into the nature of the evolutionary factors of nature's forces and the actions which spring from them, knows that gunas, as senses, gunas means there are 3 components according to the Sankhya system adopted everywhere, which you know familiarly now as gunas. It's a very clever term, because guna means a rope that binds, something that binds you. And so these obstacles are obstacles that bind you, and they come in 3 varieties. No matter where you look in the universe, these 3 varieties are operating. But in the mind, they can operate as laziness. Are you meditating well? Not today. I don't feel well. So many excuses are there. What about tomorrow? Tomorrow I hear is cold. And then what? I'll do tomorrow. And then the next thing?
Too busy.
Next year. And then the next thing, I'll do it when I'm much older. At the last moment maybe I'll do it. No, at the last moment you'll be thinking whatever the mind is used to,
Yes.
namely your bank account, your home, your dog, etc. And then when it's come to time to depart, if you feel anxious about that, you'll try and cling on. That's the last klesha, clinging to life. You'll cling on. And it's a very desperate thing to watch somebody drifting away, life drifting away, and they're desperately trying to cling on and pace themselves backwards, resist it with all their might. It's a tragic thing to watch. It's a much more beautiful thing to watch somebody who just says, okay, I'm off. The most beautiful departure that I saw, and it's only a temporary departure, because our system says, no, it's only taking this off, which is worn out, and take another one, please. Or, if you really, really have done your best, then of course you'll go to a place called Brahmaloka, and the Lord will carry you across. Or, if you're one of those rare souls, Jiva Mukta, you'll be free here, now, this moment, this second, in this life. Since you're free already, it's already there if you know it, if that knowledge is there. So this was a person who planned his funeral to such a great extent, to the nth degree, that by the time he did die, all those people who were supposed to officiate at his funeral had already died. He planned what hymns to sing. He planned where the church would be, but by that time he'd moved to a different area, so it wasn't possible or feasible. He planned who would officiate, what the priest would be. He planned everything to the nth degree. And such a beautiful thing. I happened to witness how his sight had gone already. He was in his 80s. And so he gave his instructions. Please, when I do go, make sure that I'm holding my japa mala in my hands. And make sure that you close my eyes, because I don't want to be staring out at people. And make sure that my jaw is closed nicely. If you do that, then, that's fine. And because, although he was blind, at the very last moment, I saw the eyes open, and I saw him see. He was seeing, and happily drifted off like that. What a wonderful thing. See? So, but this is something we think, this will never happen to us. Never happen to us. Of course, the more advanced you get, the more you realize, whoops, you see, the end line, the finishing line is getting closer. Anyhow, so these gunas are there, and this idea of laziness in the mind we can see and observe. And this idea of a go-getter mind we can observe, an enthusiastic mind. But you see, the enthusiasm is orientated towards sustaining this egoism, because it's in my self-interest. I'm the doer, I'm the profiteer. It's only this other element, sattva, which directs its energy beyond the borders of this ego, has no egocentric idea in it. And at its height will be for the service of the entire world. And its nature is illumination, because it is pure. It is pure, not tainted by this confusion of egoism. It is full of the highest values. And when we practice and inculcate these values and saturate the mind with them, it has a settling effect. And that is why Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Because when we clarify and purify the mind, when we settle the waves according to the examples and words of these Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which gives you the analogy of a lake in disturbance, a mind that is always in turmoil, when these waves are settled, then we are able to clearly see with great purity. Purity means clarity. We're able to see this underlying self and all its glory. And so the gunas and the actions which spring from them know that gunas, as the senses, merely move among other gunas. Nature moving among nature, that's all. As the objects, and does not become entangled. We're talking about entanglement. The seer getting confused and identifying itself with everything else. So what is yoga? Yoga is disentangling things. And the Patanjali Yoga Sutras describes it in its last chapter, 4th chapter, as kaivalya. Kaivalya, isolation. Disentangling all this complex mess and removing all the confusion and sitting there in the purity of the self. Those who are deluded by this get attached to the functions, and the man of perfect knowledge should not unsettle the minds of those dull-witted. And that is why we are able to teach people to shift the gear from tamas to rajas to sattva. Don't go from tamas to sattva. And if people don't know about the sattva, at least lift people up from a lethargy to activity, even if it's egocentric, and from there to purity of mind, like that. So we don't discourage anybody, not even the dull-witted. And then finally surrendering all actions to me as a method. With your thoughts centered on the self, see, Mayi sarvani karmani samnyasya, freeing yourself from hope and selfishness. Hope creates anxiety. And cured of mental fever, engage in, he says battle, but for our purposes, engage in your life. And it need not be a battle. It need not be a struggle. Take it as a game. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace be unto all. You can stop this.
That will also be recorded. We can stop this.